exposing what these parks have to offer, not in a guidebook sort of way, but tapping into what these places are all about and what the people who work at them are all about as well.
This is Defender Radio. I'm Michael Howie, and this is Defender Radio, the podcast for wildlife advocates and animal lovers, brought to you by the Fur Bearers. There are 417 national parks and historic sites in the United States National Park System, visited by more than 275 million people every year. Among those numbers is a power couple doing something pretty awesome. Sarah and Lucas Villa-Kainec want to visit each and every park and site in the National Park System, and along the way, they want to share the stories of these remarkable places. But they don't want to write another travel guide. They want the real stories, told by the people who spend their days, and sometimes a good portion of their lives, at those locations. That's why they started their new show, Podcasts with Park Rangers. Sarah and Lucas interview park rangers and share their wonderful, passionate stories about these incredible places, including a love of the flora and fauna of caves, the historical significance of many locations, and more. The Villa-Kainecs joined Defender Radio to share their story about the stories and what listeners to this new podcast can expect to learn about national parks, RVing from park to park with their cats, and what makes these locations so special. A 5-minute news brief version of this interview is also available at thefurbears.com, the iTunes Store, or anywhere else you listen to podcasts. I think the fun place to start, and I was reading about this on your blog, is the story of how the two of you got together. We're going to go back in time a bit.
Well, sure. Okay.
Because it is a wonderfully romantic tale in a wonderfully unromantic way.
It's a good way to put it, yes. So the two of us met in Denver, in Colorado. So we're now back in our home state, although neither of us grew up here. We did meet in Denver, and we met through the video game Rock Band. Mm-hmm. Both of us being geeks.
Yeah.
A friend of mine was doing Rock Band at bars and restaurants and big events. One of these being an anime convention, which my now wife attended. And didn't do a whole lot of anime stuff because she was hanging out in the Rock Band room. And I should probably let you tell a little bit of this story from your perspective.
I'm not really into that anymore, but at the time I was. And I just moved to Colorado, and I was looking to make friends, and found these guys, and thought they were pretty interesting. And I talked to the owner, and he invited me to their regular Rock Band night at a bar.
Yeah, we had a weekly gig of sorts.
So basically,
of faking being Rock Band.
Yeah,
rock
basically
stars.
Karaoke with plastic guitars.
Awesome. And drums, come on.
Yeah.
Yes,
there's
and
drums.
The drums.
Yeah.
You get a full band.
I play drums.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And then romance just sort of grew.
Yeah.
That's
so we didn't really talk at the anime convention, but subsequent to that, we chatted at this weekly gig. I invited her out to trivia night. I think we were doing actually more geeky stuff, mm-hmm. Geeks Who Drink, which is kind of a nationwide gig where a bunch of geeks get together and form teams and do trivia while drinking beer and having food. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that was an early date. And then from there, another early date of ours, you could say, was a 10-day excursion that Sarah planned, being an epic planner, to a number of national parks just north of where we were. And 10 days was probably a little too short, would you say?
It's like we went to the Badlands National Park, Mount Rushmore, Devil's Tower, and we tried to do Yellowstone in 5 days, which is probably like trying to do Banff in 5 days. Not really easy.
Yeah. Yellowstone is one of those national parks. It was the first national park, and for good reason. People spend lifetimes there just photographing through different seasons, all the wildlife, all the thermal activity. It's just, there's so much to see there. You could spend a lifetime, and we tried to do it in about 5 days.
Yeah.
Well, I'm impressed that you spent 10 days together relatively early on, because the thought of doing that with my wife, frankly, gives me heart palpitations.
Well, it wasn't smooth sailing.
Yeah, we were tent camping in our old Cavalier, her Cavalier at the time, and yeah, there were a few arguments over tent setup, and yeah, it was not smooth sailing 100%.
I think one night I put the tent up by myself, and then he came back and was like, "How'd you get that up by yourself?"
Yeah, that's really a 2-man job, but somehow anger at me fueled.
It's amazing how that happens sometimes, isn't it? The power of anger at a significant other just gets stuff done.
It does.
So we skip ahead, and the two of you, you love camping and hiking. You've been doing a blog about this. How did you go from just loving the process, loving being together and exploring the national parks and monuments and all the other sites, to saying, hey, we should get an RV, we should do a show, we should do this, we should do that? How did you take that big step forward?
That was several steps forward. And it was a progression that eventually has led us to where we are doing this podcast, although it really just started as an idea that formed in our heads that we would go to all of these national park sites.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So Sarah, you got the stamp book.
There's like a national parks passport book. So you can go to each park and get like a stamp. It's kind of geeky and nerdy. There's like a whole enthusiast community behind it though. And
yeah, you can post the stamps up online, and
That's fun.
kind of show off your Pokemon. You've got to catch them all.
Well, it's similar to like geocaching. I'm into that. So
yeah.
There you go. Yeah.
So we started doing that, and I mean, there's 417 national park and historic sites. And after about a year or two of trying, we're like, this is taking too long. We're never going to get done before retirement.
Yeah, we had made a pretty good go of it, being that we were rooted in Denver. We covered all of the national park sites within the state of Colorado, and several others when we would travel, because we have family throughout the U.S. now, both pretty large extended family as well. So we were doing a good bit of traveling. We were getting stamps as we went, but we really weren't going to knock out all 417 if we didn't uproot ourselves.
Yeah, and I don't know where I thought about RVing for a while. I think there's a couple bloggers that I really liked reading. Gone with the Winds is one of them. And then there's like a couple named Heath and Alyssa. And they kind of inspired me to bring up, hey, maybe we should live in an RV and travel the US, because that's kind of crazy. And I've always, I don't know, there's a part of me that's really had a hard time staying in one place for a very long time. And I think part of that's because my dad was in the military, so we moved around a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, well, this kind of satisfies that wanderlust, I guess you can call it.
Mm-hmm.
So she proposed this to me at some point, and I don't know, we had always been into traveling, I suppose, and I'm a fairly go with the flow type, and also moved around a good bit when I was younger. So I said, yeah, let's go for it. The opportunity arose because Denver's real estate market is super hot right now. We had a house that we bought at the bottom of the market. The market was going like to the top, basically, just skyrocketing.
Yeah. So, and there was one other thing that happened, which is my job, the company I was at got bought, and I was given the opportunity to be they're like, you can either continue your job here, or you can work for us for a year, transition stuff, and we'll give you a severance package. And I'm like, I think I'll take the second one.
Yeah.
So it kind of just like all fell into place at the same time. And we're like, okay, we can do this. We're going to have a bit of a cash flow. So let's try. And then, so I guess the podcast part of it though. Well,
yeah, that again, it's several steps that got us here. We wanted to launch, we wanted to explore all the sites, we wanted to figure out being entrepreneurs and working on the road. But the idea for a podcast kind of came up just from a few of the visits that we had to different national parks within Colorado while we were still rooted even. So this was a good year or so ago from when we're talking to you now. And we were seeing the passion that a lot of these park rangers had, the engagement that they had with the park units that they were working at. And we were like, wouldn't it be really cool? Well, I brought it up, I think, one time, that I had this idea for doing a podcast with park rangers, to kind of get those stories out, to build some awareness, certainly, but also just to kind of share what we had found, which is a great love for the parks, for their history, for the landscapes, and for the science that's being preserved in these special public lands. So yeah, I brought that up a good year or so ago, and now we have finally kind of the fire has been lit, so to speak. So,
and you've got 2 episodes out already, and they're both fascinating. And it's, I was just listening to them, and you hear some of the comments, and the one ranger talks about microbes, and he says, like the way he's describing it is that like it's like an action movie about defenses and evolution and this and that. And, as someone I'm a journalist by trade, I'm not a scientist, but I really appreciate and enjoy learning about natural sciences. And hearing the way he tells it draws you in to something that otherwise is insanely dull.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
it has the potential to be very, very dry, science-y topic.
And he was extremely enthusiastic about what he does.
Yeah.
But I think, we've done 7 interviews now. Yeah. And I wouldn't say every single one, but nearly all of them, they're extremely enthusiastic about what they do.
And that's got to be a remarkable thing to be able to capture, to talk with people who genuinely love what they're doing with their lives. With everything that's gone on in the last year and a half regarding the national parks, there was a sort of a resist movement, which I think is quieted down, but is still kicking around, I'm sure.
Somewhat. Well, yeah, we were actually just in Utah, which, that's kind of the seat for a lot of that movement, as you mentioned.
Yeah. Well, when you say resist, you mean like anti-national parks, or you mean?
Well, the folks who are pro-national parks, but there was the threat of cuts and shutdowns and so on.
You're thinking of it from the wrong side.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I think that's still going on. I still see it a lot on the social media. And the parks are still seeing record attendance. People are still getting out. So it's I don't think it's going to die down.
Well, that's a good thing.
So yeah, with this, yes, the record attendance is certainly a good thing, driving awareness to the fact that they're also dealing with backlogs and in maintenance and staffing, and being able to kind of rise to the challenges that these record attendance numbers, you know, put in front of them, which, yeah, it's no small feat for these rangers. But as you say, they're in it because they love the idea of the park service, as well as they just really love the parks that they work at. A lot of these rangers we hear in talking to them, what do you do in your spare time? Well, I took a vacation last weekend and I went to this other national park.
This is what they do. And it's been almost all of them say that pretty much.
Yeah.
That's incredible. Well, I want to circle back to some of those numbers we were talking about, but
yeah,
in your interview so far, what are some of the things other than the enjoyments that are really striking you? Are there similarities sort of across the different types of jobs that the rangers are doing across the different parks and geographies? Or is it more that you notice differences?
Let's see. So there's 2 types of rangers. Well, maybe 3 we've interviewed so far.
But there are many other types as well, which we hope to get to.
But the main one we've interviewed is the interpretive ranger, which is basically if you go to a national park, they're probably the people you talk to. They're the ones staffing the desks.
The public face.
They're the ones taking you on ranger tours and giving talks. So they're like kind of the people persons of the parks. And by far, a lot of them want to be educators. They just didn't want to be educators in a traditional sense.
Yeah, they didn't want to be in a classroom setting, which you'll hear from the very first interview. But we've heard this message repeated with a lot of, in particular, interpretive rangers who have a love for the outdoors, who want to educate, who are very well-spoken in that manner, who want to really connect with kids as well as adults who are curious. But then they want to do that in a setting like what the National Park Service offers, which is going out and pointing to these amazing features and the wildlife and, you know, everything else that you find, which is a wide variety from park to park. That part does vary quite a bit.
Yeah, and also I think a lot of them grew up going to parks, so like that appreciation I think was already there.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
it's interesting that they want to be out there teaching, which I think makes a lot of sense. And I don't think anyone would debate the value of being outdoors and learning about what you're seeing around you and interacting with it or being a part of it is definitely different than what you can learn in a classroom. And that's not to discount either one of those things, but it is a very unique situation. And what is exciting for me about your show is that you are going to talk with these people in places that I haven't been, and hopefully I'll be able to get to someday, but you know, it's not practical for me to get to a national park in Colorado or to spend a week in an RV exploring an area. So it's
Right.
exciting that you're going to sort of be able to share that enthusiasm and those lessons in a very, very accessible way. Is that one of your goals with the show?
Yeah, I think so.
Yes, absolutely. And very well stated on your part. So, so thank you. Yeah, I mean, a bit of it is perhaps allowing people to live vicariously through what we're doing, but educating, absolutely. And spreading the message and just kind of exposing what these parks have to offer, not in a guidebook sort of way, because there are plenty of guidebooks out there. If you really are interested in one of these sites, you can find the info you need, but kind of tapping into what these places are all about and what the people who work at them are all about as well.
Yeah, and a topic we tend to hit on is like conservation and preservation of these places, and why is that important? I mean, we ask pretty much every episode why have the national parks and why preserve that system. And we've got, the responses are varied, I'd say, on that.
They are. They're varied because each person and each ranger, each visitor, each person who visits these public lands connects with them in a very unique sort of way.
Yeah.
In a very personal sort of way.
I like that. I was just thinking, I mean, it sounds like the kind of question you would ask and they would recite the answer to.
No.
Oh, well, in 1916, President Roosevelt decided ... That's what you would expect the answer to be, I would think, or at least that's what I would expect it to be, particularly from someone who's outward facing. So it is very neat that they all have that personal, this is why it matters. And certainly offers a personality to the park in a way.
Yeah, I think so. Like, I think it was the first episode with Katie where she said, well, how did she say it? We're all going to interpret the parks differently and connect with them in our own way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. She said by setting these places aside and allowing each person to visit, they kind of build their own connections based on their interests and based on what they find when they do visit. So yeah, we do try to get beyond what we've occasionally joked with one another and called ranger mode, which is just that sort of rehearsed, I am speaking to a crowd. However, we've heard from another ranger who's worked interpretation for a rather long career at this point, and actually headed up a different division, the PR division at Grand Canyon, and returned back to interpretation. We talked a lot to her with her about the job of interpretation, and she said it's really about gauging your audience and not going into that rehearsed mode, about really kind of allowing each person to, or figuring out who your audience is. So I think in that sense, if interpretive rangers are the ones that are kind of our go-to, that's a good thing. Yeah. Because we are able to kind of access that. But we do try to kind of get beyond those barriers, perhaps that stiffness, that rehearsed. We save that sort of question for the very last, usually, because at that point they're, I don't want to say more vulnerable, but they're a little more open. Yeah,
they're more relaxed. So.
Right.
That's definitely the art of the interview. To put in context the job of these rangers, this statistic, and this was the population info that I wanted to come back to, they have over 275 million visitors per year at the parks and sites. That's almost the entire population of the United States, or the entire population of Canada several times over, cycling through these sites. How can you possibly go to a site like this and not just be surrounded by people?
It depends on the site you go to.
Yeah.
I mean, if you go to Yellowstone in the middle of summer, it's going to be super, super duper crowded. We personally, with the big parks that we know are going to be crowded, like to go in the spring or fall.
Yeah, kind of on that shoulder season.
And then the other way is by finding out about the other parks in the system that aren't major national parks.
Yeah, those hidden gems, and there are a lot of them, because as we've mentioned several times, 417 units in the park system. There are a lot of just little ones. Like, for example, we found while we were in Denver a really cool little place that's a day trip away. It's just a few hours drive, and while we love Rocky Mountain National Park, which is huge, has a lot of visitorship, and for good reason, it's spectacular. Florissant Fossil Beds was very cool as well, and has a lot of variety and interesting history, geology,
hiking,
good hiking as well. So yeah, it's a great destination. And I think a lot of people have those sort of places that maybe they weren't aware of. So if you're going to drive 4 miles to Yellowstone in the dead of summer, maybe rethink that, because you're going to be surrounded by people. So think about maybe some of these smaller sites that might be near.
Yeah, and if you're not interested in historic sites, there's a ton of national monuments which are still very outdoors oriented. There's even national parks that don't get a ton of visitors, like sticking with the Colorado examples, there's like Black Canyon of the Gunnison. It's one of the least visited national parks, but I think it's a giant canyon that's deeper than the Grand Canyon, and it's amazing. Mm-hmm. So it's just like, so I guess that's part of our purpose on the podcast as well, is to bring light to maybe some of these places that could be right in your backyard, and try to get people to go to some of those as well.
I think if they had named it Grander Canyon, it would probably be more popular.
Yeah.
It's interesting that there are so many and that they vary in such a way. Just in that sort of, some of them are popular. And again, you say Yellowstone National Park. Everybody knows what you're talking about in North America, and I would presume in large parts of Europe too. I mean, it's iconic.
I would say that it might be international, because I know there's when there's a ton of Asian people who fly in just to go to Yellowstone, and it's an international draw. I know when we were there, we met. Well, we didn't always speak with everybody, but there are definitely people from China. There are definitely people from Australia, Europe. I don't know about South America, but
it's a diverse audience.
It is certainly. And it's getting more diverse.
And that's both a good thing and a concerning thing, so long, I think, as the rangers themselves are able to be funded properly, so they can make sure certain issues don't come up. And I think that's where we can talk about something next, is what people need to know when they are visiting, whether it is the Grand Canyon or Yellowstone or a small monument site. What are some of the things people need to be very, very aware of as they explore these?
What are a few of the things? Well, again, just like the units themselves and the wide variety you can find, the things you need to be aware of do certainly vary a lot. For example, I grew up in Louisiana, which is South Gulf Coast, humid, hot. There's life springing up everywhere. It's always green. It's, you're surrounded by bugs and life, and everything springs back very quickly. Having just explored parts of New Mexico and Utah, the desert, the high desert plains, there's life out there. There's a lot of it, but it's also very fragile. So being aware of your footsteps, for example, it may just look like there's dirt you're walking on, but it's this really interesting stuff called cryptobiotic soil, which kind of allows life to flourish out there. Yeah. And it's very sensitive to being stepped on. So it changed the way that we hiked. It changed our awareness. That's just one small example, though. There are numerous things to be aware of, and there are educational efforts by the parks, but a lot of it comes to self-educating and being willing to kind of explore what those differences are.
Yeah, and I think part of it is, like, people go to parks and sometimes they don't stop by the visitor center, or they don't read the material that's handed to them when they go into the park. And a lot of times that material, or just going in and talking with rangers, they will learn about how to be or as one ranger put it, how to be appropriate in that particular park.
Mm-hmm.
So I think part of it does rely on self-education.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, with funding not being the greatest right now for the national parks, there can't always be a ranger monitoring everybody. So it's like we're gonna have to like rely on people to self-educate, or maybe I guess part of our purpose is to try to educate people as well. I mean, that soil he was talking about, the cryptobiotic soil, I mean, that stuff takes 30 to 60 years to regenerate.
Wow.
And it's right along all the hiking paths. But where was I going with that?
What, self-educating?
Yeah.
But I think one of the rangers we talked to put it very well, which was that these are our national parks as visitors, not only as U.S. citizens. Certainly there's that, but each visitor can be a steward to the park themselves. It's not just about the rangers being out there and policing
Mm-hmm.
people, because each person there who visits can self-educate and can also kind of have this awareness that we are in special places.
Yeah. And I think the other thing was, if you see something that probably shouldn't be going on, I mean, say something or call, the visitor center so that they can do something about it.
Yeah, that's been a big issue outside of Banff National Park here in Canada.
Yeah.
Is the feeding of wildlife on the side of the road.
Mm-hmm.
And that is between some of the parks. So there's highways that stretch, and people pull over, and I see it and it terrifies me. People getting within 15 feet of large bears, be it black or grizzly, trying to get pictures while they feed. And you don't have room to go anywhere. He doesn't have room to go anywhere. And you're next to a highway. So you start just doing this, and then you've got the animals literally coming up to people's windows in their cars because of that. It is absolutely insane to see. And that's I know they're experimenting with different ways to report this, because you get these, they're actually called bear jams. I don't know if you've heard of that.
Mm-hmm.
People pull over and stop to take pictures of the animals.
Well, sure. Yeah, that does happen in some parks. Going back to Yellowstone, the bison there, the buffalo or bison,
bison.
American bison,
North
American bison.
Bison.
It's both the genus and species, I believe. Yep. So the bison really rule that park, and you get traffic jams because of them. And you don't want wildlife like that, which is enormous, and could get protective, could get aggressive because of their food needs. You don't want them associating humans with food. So you mentioned feeding. You also don't want to be taking selfies with the bison, or if you see a mountain lion while you're hiking, that's probably because they want you to see them.
Yep.
And at that point, it's not a photo opportunity.
It's a you should be worried opportunity.
Yeah, I wrote about bear selfies. It was a hashtag that was popping up on Instagram a couple of years ago.
Oh, really?
And I wrote a blog about it, and we sent it out to our supporters. And I wrote it, and I kind of thought, should we really be telling these people not to do it? Like, is this not nature's way of letting us know something about certain people? Apparently, though, that's insensitive. No, and the bigger problem, of course, is that the act ultimately falls on the shoulders of the animal, of the wildlife. They're the ones who have to pay. And that's always the unfortunate end of this. And I think that's maybe what people forget is, yes, it's your moment, but when we're talking about 275 million people per year doing these kinds of things, it creates situations for the animals to find themselves in. And as I said, typically what ends up happening is the animal has to pay for that. So it's a constant lesson.
Yeah, I know in the U.S. that might lead to an animal being euthanized in the parks because it can't survive on its own anymore if you're feeding it.
Yeah. And when and like you said, like with a bison with large animals, if they associate people and cars with foods, they become a hazard to themselves and others as well. And
exactly.
And that's, ideally there are other solutions to sort of manage that when it happens, but it is entirely up to us. Now, I did want to ask, so there are two wonderful people named John and Gemma who have the Something Like Marriage podcast, and they RV as well. And they've done a couple episodes about RVing with their kids. I think they've got 4 kids. And that, again, gives me heart palpitations. But you RV with your cats, and I have multiple dogs, and I'm trying to convince my wife that we don't need a pension. We do need an RV. I'm losing that battle. I'll tell you right now.
Oh, no.
She said,
"Can we help persuade her in some way?"
Well, I figure she's leaning towards giving me a sleeping bag to put in my Chevy, which may be as close as I get to an RV for the next 10 years. But I am fascinated how you travel with your pets. And I know we can't go too in depth on that now, but I did want to ask about that because I saw it on the blog, I think in a picture, and it's so interesting to me. What's that like?
It's pretty interesting sometimes.
It is.
So on days where we move, we do crate them because I always worry about like getting in an accident or something, and then to me, I don't want a cat flying across the bus and breaking its back or something like that. So we do crate them.
You don't want them getting underfoot while you're trying to drive or anything like that.
Oh yeah.
So we crate them, and the oldest one, he's 8 with a little resistant at first, but he's getting used to it. The younger 2, who are just about 2, they adapted right away. So the older one now, he's pretty laid back. He just sleeps in his cage now on moving days. In fact, we'll start cleaning up, packing things away, and he'll know, and he just goes straight into the cage now. He's like, I know it's a moving day.
Yeah, we don't even have to put the door on it or latch it. He's okay, let's get this over with.
Yeah. Well, that's a sign of successful crate training.
Yeah.
There you go.
So once we get to wherever we're going, though, we open up the cages, and they pretty much go straight to the dash. So the big picture window in front, because they want to see how did the outside change.
Yeah, it's really great seeing, because they always seem very comfortable now because this is home. Yep. This RV is their home. It's a rolling home, and they understand that on moving days and every time we stop and let them out, they have different vistas. The outdoors has changed, as Sarah put it. We also let them outside sometimes, but not to roam free and get, potentially snagged by a coyote or something. 2 of them are leash trained, one more so than the other. The younger 2 will wear leashes and go on short little walks, not of the sort that you get out of a dog, but still a walk of sorts.
They like to go out and sniff things.
Yeah.
And just kind of explore. And then we also have a cat tent.
Awesome.
So we'll put them in the cat tent sometimes, if the leash is a little too much of a hassle, or we're trying to work outside or something, we'll put them in the cat tent. And the older one, he hates the leash, but he'll go in the cat tent sometimes. He's a bit
for
of
brief
a home,
periods.
He's a bit of a homebody.
He is a homebody.
The outside's a little terrifying to him.
I would love to see more content about your cats exploring national parks with you, personally. I think that's a lot of fun.
Yeah, that would. We haven't gotten them out into the national parks, but
the parking areas and the camping areas, even.
Yeah,
sure. Yeah,
I mean, where we're at right now, we're outside of Great Sand Dunes National Park, and I was gonna say some pictures here would probably be pretty good.
They would be.
So
one giant litter box.
It is. Yeah, that's one park that is very resilient, actually, once you get out on the dunes. So I imagine they might even be open to seeing cats being walked on the dunes.
I don't know about that.
Well, I'm glad that you're very responsible with the cats while they're out. That's good to hear. Now, what's next? So you've got 2 episodes out that people can go and listen to, and we will come around to the how you can listen in a second. What is what is the
we have a third
future?
Releasing today. We were up late finalizing. Well, still have some final production to put finishing touches on it, and then we'll release episode number 3.
That will be up when we air this. Well, when we post it.
It should be, and perhaps even a 4th by then. We'll be publishing regularly on Mondays is the plan.
So the next one is a little national monument in New Mexico called El Morro National Monument, and it's well known for this big sandstone bluff that people would go to while they're going west or
traveling through for various reasons. It preserves 1,000 years of history.
Wow.
It's got Indian,
by way of what they call inscription rock, because people were carving their names. Even indigenous people 1,000 years back were leaving petroglyphs there. But then that I guess started a tradition. So it preserves many different cultures and histories of people that have passed through there. So it's very interesting from a historical perspective.
It has Spanish inscriptions. So conquistadors were in that area, and they wrote Paso por aquí, which is I passed by here. And then shortly after, that area became a territory of the United States, you start seeing Anglo-American names on the rock. So it's a pretty interesting place.
Definitely.
It's very different. Yeah. And then that one after that's El Malpais, which is another small national monument that's really well known for lava flows and lava tubes. That's also in New Mexico. So I don't remember how old the lava flows are. It's been a while.
Mm-hmm.
Probably pretty old.
Years. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, some of it.
Some are newer on a geological time period.
Like last week, are we talking? Or
No. A few hundred years ago, I think. So people were in the area when there was lava flow, but now there isn't anymore. So you talk a bit more geology in that one.
That's cool. Yeah. And it sounds like such a great combination. And I love the idea of the park rangers sharing their love of the park where they work. So I'm really looking forward to hearing more from you guys. And if people want to listen to the show, podcast with park rangers, where can they go?
There's 2 ways, I guess.
Well, the simplest way, since you mentioned the name of the show, which is Podcasts with Park Rangers, both plural, is podcastswithparkrangers.com. Now that will redirect to our blog site, on which we have a sort of landing page for the podcast, as well as individual pages for each one as they get published. But the website on which we do a lot of blogging and kind of inspiring people to camp, hike, and explore in general, whether it be national parks or whatever, that website is virtualcamper.com, and that's camper with a K due to our last name being a hyphenated V and K. So
I didn't catch that. Clever.
That's the shtick.
You're probably like, why is it spelled weird?
And you're also on iTunes and Stitcher, and are you on Spotify yet?
No.
Not on Spotify yet.
All right.
This week has been, apparently it's hard. It's a lot of work to launch a podcast.
Yeah. I wouldn't recommend trying to launch with 3 heavily produced episodes.
And trying to do it all last minute.
when you're also figuring out the whole promotional side of things, as well as how to get them posted to various platforms like Spotify, not quite yet, but
Eventually.
that takes an approval process, as I
It
understand.
does, actually. Defender Radio, I think I'm with Libsyn, who have an automated system for it. And even still, it was like from me requesting it, it took about 2 weeks, I think.
Oh, wow.
And that's
Okay.
with like 4 years worth of shows behind me too,
Oh,
right?
wow.
So
Yeah, I was thinking we'd wait till we have a little more content before we put it out there. So
Yeah, before we present it to Spotify. iTunes picked it up pretty quickly. We were thinking it could take time there, but they
iTunes
snagged it just based on the promo 4-minute teaser that we put up. So.
Yeah, iTunes is the best one to be on because that's where a lot of other podcast feeds pull from. They pull listings from iTunes, so that gets up on all of the alternative sites.
And you mentioned Libsyn. We're using Blueberry.
Yeah, so. Those are the two big ones. And that is enough podcast nerd talk. So episodes weekly, Mondays, and thank you both.
Yeah, Thank you.
Hear more from Sarah and Lucas at podcastwithparkrangers.com or search for Podcast with Park Rangers on the iTunes Store or anywhere else you listen to podcasts. I've already subscribed. That's it for now, folks. Thanks again for listening, and remember to support the show through Patreon at patreon.com/DefenderRadio, or follow me on Facebook and Twitter at Defender Radio and Instagram at Howie Michael for updates. Until next time, I'm Michael Howie for Defender Radio, reminding you to stay informed and stay strong.